This is a Squiz podcast. We're your shortcut to being informed.
Squiz Kids!
It's your daily news fix. Fun, free, fresh.
Welcome, ladies and jelly beans, to this special Squiz Kids Q&A, brought to you by our friends at the Australian Electoral Commission, or the AEC for short. What's the AEC, I hear you ask? Sounds a bit on the dull side, right? But actually, it's not. If it's human drama you're after, if it's big decisions being made about all the stuff that's going to have an impact on your life, then elections are where it's at. We're talking ScoMo versus Albo, Labor versus Liberal, Greens and Independents and electorates and contests that come down to the wire. Elections have got it all. And it's the job of the Australian Electoral Commission to make our elections run smoothly and fairly. That means everything from setting up the funky little cardboard voting booths to supplying the pencils people use to vote and counting all of the votes at the end of the day. If an election was your weekend footy or netball game, the AEC is like the club administrators, the referees, touch judges and lines people all rolled into one. So, a pretty big job. And even though he's incredibly busy just now, Ekin-Smyth from the AEC has agreed to join us to explain exactly what an election is and what goes on inside those mysterious cardboard voting booths. Please join me in welcoming Evan to the Squiz Kids hot seat.
Thanks, Bryce. It's excellent to be here.
Now, Evan, before we jump into questions from the kids themselves, we thought we'd try something new, a bit of a departure from our normal Squiz Kids Q&A format. Because there's so much to know about elections, I'm going to test you on your knowledge of all things election with a fast minute of facts. I'll set the stopwatch for 60 seconds. You answer as many questions as you can in that time. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, here we go. Your time starts now. What's a federal election?
It's when we elect people to go to Canberra to work in Parliament House and make decisions on how the country is run.
How often do federal elections happen?
The government has to call an election at least every 3 years. The political party in power can call an election earlier than 3 years, but no later. What's
a political party?
Many people who go into politics team up with other politicians who share the same ideas about how the country should be run. Those teams are called political parties. So election day is really like a bunch of teams competing against one another.
What's an electorate?
Everyone in Australia lives in an electorate. An electorate is an area marked out on the map of Australia. Think of it as a collection of suburbs if you live in a big city, or a collection of towns if you live in the country. Each electorate can send one candidate to Canberra to represent them.
What's a candidate?
Someone who wants to be elected to represent a group of his or her fellow Australians in Parliament.
What's Parliament?
Well, it's a big building in Canberra you see on the TV news every night. It's where our elected representatives go to make decisions on our behalf about how the country is run.
And what's with all the sausage sizzles?
Who doesn't love a sausage sizzle, Bryce?
Evan, time's up. Well done. I feel election smarter already, I have to say.
And I feel tired. That was exhausting.
Just getting you ready for election day, my friend. If you think this is exhausting, wait till you have to count all those votes.
Very good point.
A quick message now from our partner, the Australian Electoral Commission. For curious kids, parents or teachers who would like to learn more about elections, they have heaps of resources available. Just check out education.aec.gov.au. So, now we've got a few questions from kids about elections. You think you're ready to take the Squiz Kids hot seat and cop some curly ones from our listeners?
Sure. Come on, kids, do your worst.
Okay, our first question comes from Gus, who is 8 years old and lives in Sydney. And he asks, when my mum and dad go into the school hall to vote, they have to go into a little cardboard booth so no one can see who they vote for, then fold the paper before putting it in the ballot box. Why is it all so secretive?
Great question. Here in Australia, our elections take place using a secret ballot. Sounds cool, doesn't it? It means that every person that votes is given the privacy and the space in the funky cardboard voting booth to make their choice without any outside pressure or influence. It's so that we can ensure that every vote reflects the true intention of every voter.
Oh. Nice one. I love those funky cardboard voting booths. I always thought they'd make a perfect cubby house. Is that what you do with them in between elections at the AEC?
Yeah, not so much.
Here's a question now from Alice, who's 10 years old from Townsville. She asks, I've heard on the radio people talking about something called compulsory voting. What does that mean and why is it important?
Compulsory voting means just what it sounds like. Every Australian over the age of 18 is required by law to cast a vote in an election. Only 22 other countries in the world make every adult vote in elections. In Australia, if you're an adult and you don't vote without a good reason, you can be fined.
Uh-oh.
People have different opinions on compulsory voting. Supporters say it's a great system for getting people involved in the political process, hopefully making them think about the sorts of people they want to run their country.
Now a question from Tom, who's 9 years old and lives with his family in Singapore. He asks, what happens if you're an Australian who is overseas on election day? Do you still get to vote?
Great question. Lots of Australians will be overseas or interstate or, for one reason or another, not able to get to a polling station, which is a fancy name for the place you go to cast your vote. For instance, there's a bunch of Aussie scientists who live on a research station in Antarctica, so obviously they can't come to a school hall in Adelaide to vote. Brrr. Not to mention all of those people who are Australian citizens but live in another country. For those people, we have postal voting, which is when you vote ahead of election day and send your ballot papers in to us via the mail. Your vote gets put in with all the other ones that come to us from all over the country on election day and contributes to the final outcome.
And our final question comes from Abby, who lives in Tarragindi in Brisbane, and she asks, how many pencils do you need to supply so that everyone can cast their vote?
Would you believe, to run an election this time, given there's a COVID pandemic, we'll have 4.5 million pencils. If you laid them down end to end, they can run from the bottom of Tasmania to the top. In fact, they'd spill into Bass Strait.
Whoa!
We also create and send out about 150,000 funky cardboard voting booths. And the reason we go to all this effort and expense is because voting is a really important part of any democracy, which is exactly what Australia very proudly is.
All right, but what about sausages? How many sausages?
What is it with you and the sausages, Bryce?
Who doesn't love a sausage?
So tasty.
Well, kids, that's all we have time for, I'm afraid. A huge thank you to Evan from the Australian Electoral Commission for walking us through the who, what, when, where and why of elections. I have to say, I feel smarter already.
You're very welcome.
And, Evan, don't suppose there's a chance I can get some of those funky cardboard voting booths when the election is over? You know, to make a cubby in my backyard.
No.
Ah, well, never hurts to ask. Thanks for listening to this special Squiz Kids Q&A. And remember, as we say each day on the daily Squiz Kids news podcast, get out there and have a most excellent day. Over and out.